action.
All right, welcome everyone to the Analytics in Action How-To series by Association Analytics. I'm Katrina McAfee. I'm the marketing manager here at A2. We're going to give it just a minute for people to get logged on. Let us know where you're calling in from. You can also let us know how your weather is. I know everyone's from different parts of the country. I'm in North Florida, where right now it is 75 and dry and just so lovely for Florida.
Nice.
How's your weather up there in DC? You too?
I had frost on my car this morning. I needed it to warm up and use the defroggers before I got in.
Oh no.
Same here. Same here. Little warmer now.
Yeah, fall and spring are the best times to be in North Florida, I think.
Sunny Chicago. Love it.
Chilly.
Yeah, freezing
Chapel
cold
Hill.
Chicago, I bet.
I'm expecting 100% registered attendance today.
How are you? Lofty goals.
Apologize for my lighting situation, everybody. We're doing webinars from the office now, which is kind of a new thing. And the setup is not as awesome as what we have at home. So
We'll get you a ring light, Bill.
I know. I need one of those. I didn't have it at home. I stole it from my daughter. Jesus.
I want one of those fancy microphones that looks like I'm on the radio.
Oh, there you go.
If Dave Will can have one, why can't I have one? That's really what I need to know in life. Central Texas, welcome, Karen. Niru, all the way from London. Thanks for joining us, buddy.
Yeah. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. It looks like people joining slowing down. So again, I'm Katrina McAfee from Association Analytics. Today, you are here to learn about how to get actionable data from your surveys. Your hosts, if you've been here before, you've met them, Bill and Greg, the Bill and Greg Show. So Bill's our VP of Strategy and Solutions, and Greg's our VP of Sales. They've been in the association and data world for many years. I won't age them, but you're in good hands here. So I'm gonna switch it over to, I think, Greg, you're gonna take it away.
Thanks, everybody. So today we're gonna be talking about surveys, all about collecting those results, how we planned it, how we executed it. And we actually did this. So we're gonna tell you the good, the bad, the things we screwed up, and the things we got right. We're gonna walk through our 5 steps to be successful. Today, we're going to be covering the first 3, and then next week is our follow-up session. We're going to be covering the second 2. We're going to talk about planning and design, marketing, collecting our data. We're going to give you some juicy insights into how all that worked. Obviously, we're going to summarize, give you our key takeaways. We're going to be polling you. We're going to be asking you questions throughout the entire process, hopefully getting you to be as interactive as we can. Who is Association Analytics? I feel like if you're here by now, you know this. But I talk to people all the time who are newbies. So if this is your first time, welcome. We are Association Analytics. We're located right here in Arlington, Virginia. And we are an organization exclusively focused on helping associations leverage data and their technology tools to make better insights with the data. We integrate all that stuff out of the box into a nice data lake. We use visualizations to help explore that data and provide insights to business users about what's going on with their data. We do a lot more than that too. We do data governance, data cleanup, data quality things, all those things you might want to need to do along the road of analytics journey.
Okay.
We always like to do a just for fun. So here's my just for fun today. It's a challenge for all of you. Bill mentioned we're back in the office. This is literally the wall in my office today. It's right here. It's actually a wall. And I'm going to challenge you to decorate my wall. I'm going out on a limb here. If you physically mail Bill and me something, we will stick it on the wall in our office. You can send me whatever you want. It can be your association logo. It can be something funny. As long as it's appropriate, I will stick it on my wall and it will show up in all the webinars we do from our office moving forward. It could be a 20-foot version of Mark Lowry's head. I don't care. Whatever you've got, you mail it to this address that we just put in the chat, and I will literally stick it on the wall, and you can be represented in all of our webinars moving forward. I don't know if anybody's going to take us up on that. I certainly hope I get lots of fun things in the mail. I can't wait to put them on the wall and have you prominently displayed in all of our webinars from here on out. The Bill and Greg Show, 1560 Wilson Boulevard, Suite 700. It's going on our wall. You can be there in theory forever, which would be pretty exciting.
Yeah, free advertising, free sponsorship. So you never know, we might be monetizing this, so get in on the ground floor while you can. All right.
Hopefully,
right, here we go.
you
So,
guys have as much fun with that as we're going to.
Okay. So now we're going to start off with a couple of poll questions. So starting with this one. So our association uses surveys effectively to gather data and take action. So this is one of those Likert questions. We're going to ask you to agree or disagree. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at the results.
Ooh.
Okay. Yeah, so just for benefit of those that might watch later on recordings, we have over 50% agree with this, that associations are using surveys effectively. So that is awesome, right? We have another 25 or so that are neutral on this, and only really a small amount are disagreeing or strongly disagreeing, about 15% there. Any surprises there, Greg?
Not a lot of surprises. I would say that not as many disagrees as I thought. I thought people joining this would want more insight onto it. We've got a lot of experts on the call today. Tell us what we did wrong as we walk through this.
Yeah, that's great. That's actually a good thing to note, is that, this is something that, Greg and I are, we're not researchers by trade. We're not survey experts. We do know, obviously, some things about data and best practices. We've seen a lot of our clients and prospects, make some mistakes in doing things like this. So, this is very much meant to be, for not necessarily for really experienced people, right? These are things that you can, learn quickly and you can implement quickly as well. I wanted to make a quick comment just on the wording of this question, because we're going to talk a lot about that, like what you should ask and why you should ask it. This is kind of an interesting one. This is what's called a double barrel question. So you notice that we say, we use surveys to gather data and to take action, right? So those are really two separate things. And so you might read that and say, well, we gather data effectively, but we don't really take action, right? Or, so the answer to part of it can be yes, and the other part can be no. And when you do that, if you do that, you should do it deliberately, right? So you don't want to confuse, when people are trying to respond, but we deliberately put those two together because, really you're not being effective if you don't take action as well as gather the data. So, and I just wanted to point that out. That's kind of a way that you can, avoid bias, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later, is by being mindful of the wording of your questions. Okay, great. So let's go to the second one then, which is very simply, what's your biggest challenge to success?
What is your biggest challenge to survey success?
Survey success, right? Now this is a good example, right? We're giving you some choices here, making it multiple choice. This is one that very easily could be an open-ended text question, right? We don't necessarily want to analyze that text in real time here on the webinar, so we gave you some choices. But another thing to keep in mind, this is a good example of the type of question that you might want to ask at open-ended. Okay.
And Elizabeth said it in the chat, lots of data, but not much action. We're going to talk about that in our second set. So this is a two-parter. Today is the first, building, collecting, how do we do that? The second part is how do we take action on it? So join us for the second part of this, where we're going to go deep into that as well.
All right, let's take a look. All right, it's about 9. Wow. Yeah, 9% time and resources, 18 survey design, 36%, not enough responses, right? So we're going to cover that pretty extensively. It's really about marketing typically, if we're not getting enough responses. Only 6% don't know how to interpret, right? So that is, that's great, right? 27 are saying that we have good data, but we don't take action. So definitely expect all of you guys to tune in for part 2 of this series. And 0%, so nobody said that they don't have any challenges and they have everything figured out. So that's good to know, right? Because the rest of the webinar is about figuring that out, right? So we're going to start with our 5 steps to survey success. There are probably more than 5, and you can bucket these out a lot of different ways. But for Greg and I, we decided on these 5, and we're going to go ahead and talk through some of these today.
Awesome. So today we're going to focus on the first 3 steps here, and then the next session we're going to focus on the second 2. We're going to talk a lot about preparation because we think there's a lot of work that needs to go into your survey before you hit that send button. It's almost too late if you didn't think about it ahead of time. We're going to talk about marketing. How did we market this? What were our results? We're going to talk about collecting the data. How did we manipulate the data? How do we collect it? And then ultimately, how did we get that data into our visualization tool? So let's break down our preparation. The first thing we want to talk about is like, why are we even doing a survey? Let's set a clear goal on why we're doing a survey. You only get so many surveys of your members, right? If we're asking them every month to fill out another survey, we're going to start running out of people who want to participate in our survey. Just because we have an annual conference doesn't mean we need to do a survey. If we're going to, we should have a clear goal. What are we hoping to achieve with this survey? And then everything else we do is going to help align to that goal. And I think we're going to give you some different goals here than you may have initially thought. Just like getting the answers to the questions may not be the goal of our survey. You got to build a team. We're not the biggest team in the world, but Bill and I didn't do all of this. We relied on a lot of other people to help us out here. The hidden owl, Katrina, jumped in and helped us out with the marketing side. Ginny, one of our data analysts, helped us out with massaging the data, getting it visual, helped us out with some best practices, building that core team of everybody, and then giving them full insight into what's going on. We didn't just tell Katrina, hey, send this email out. She was a part of the planning process. The same thing with Ginny, right? We didn't just say, here are our results. When we were building our questions, she was a part of that team because we knew that her input was going to be critical at the end of the process. Brainstorm. We met a bunch of times on this. We talked about it. We slept on it. We asked some people what their thoughts are. And we threw out hundreds of questions that we'd want to ask. And then we said, no one's going to answer 100 questions. So we refined our data, and to get a really sharp, these are the questions we really need to ask. These are the answers we really need. And we're going to talk about why we ask those questions in a minute. And then test and test. Make sure we set it up right. Make sure all of our emails worked right. We did a sample where we answered the questions ourselves. Like, just make sure when we hit that go button, we're ready for prime time.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Greg. So in the green there's a couple of tips, and some of these things, Greg mentioned, Ginny was part of the team. She's been on a few of our webinars before, but she's really good with, has a background in survey design and data collection like this. And one of the things that she told me is that best practice is to collect evidence and not emotional responses. And what she meant by that is you don't want to you want to be biased, right? So we'll talk about avoiding bias and things, but the idea is you don't want to affect the responses to questions based on emotions or based on prior questions or things like that, unless you're doing it deliberately, right? You want to choose the question format carefully. So we'll talk about different types of questions, Likert questions, multiple choice, et cetera. All of them are a little bit different for different purposes. It's not unlike choosing the right visualization or the right chart for a particular type of data. You want to make sure that the format fits. And then again, be deliberate with your phrasing, right? So there are a lot of ways that you can influence the answer to the question by the way you word it. And if you are leading the respondent in a particular direction, generally it's not a good idea to do that. But if you are doing it, then be purposeful, right? And be deliberate about that. All right.
Bill, no, it's not okay with me. Sorry. I have to disagree with one of your points there. The top point under tips, collect evidence, not emotional responses. I don't know if I agree with that. I think if we're going to collect evidence, that evidence is the data that's left behind, the registration data, the purchase data, the history behind it. I think if we're asking survey questions, don't we want some of that emotional insight, right? If this were a crime, I've got the gun, I've got the fingerprints on it. I want to interview to find out why you shot the person. I know that you did it. So I almost think a lot of surveys are to get at that emotional idea that's harder to get from the core data itself. So I'm going to disagree with your point there.
All right. Yeah. So this is the place where we're going to push it to the audience. So I want to get your input on this. Is that, I mean, who do you agree with here, right? So in one case, we are gathering evidence where it's kind of trying to be unbiased, unemotional. We're asking for data. Usually, it's going to be things that we don't already know. But on the other hand, there may be some things that we already do know, and we want context, right? We want to get the emotional side. We want to get the why. And so Greg is, I think maybe has his sales hat on a little bit there, right? We want to influence some things, and we know that emotions are a big part of the decision process for buying things. So anyway, would love to hear both emotion and evidence. Okay, good answer, Mark.
Let us know where you fall.
Right.
Let's go emotions. People make decisions based on emotions, not evidence. I don't know. What do you all think? You're here on the data webinar. I bet there's a lot of evidence people in the crowd today.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about design. So there's lots of elements to survey design, and you guys can go and read about this. There's lots of training on it about it. But if you're just starting and you want to get started with surveys, there's a couple of things that I think are important to look at. The first one is the length, right? So in our case, we wanted this survey to be about 5 minutes long. We actually came pretty close to that. Your survey tool will tell you how long it takes people to complete. So we're 5 minutes, 17 seconds for one that we plan to take 5 minutes. So, and you can test that, right? So that's something that you can do ahead of time. So in our case, there were 21 questions, 4 of which were demographic or profile. You could probably get away with fewer than that if you segment prior to sending it out. So you may know something about the demographics of your audience before you do it. 3 were multiple choice, right? Because we want to know your answer, obviously, but we're limiting it to a couple of things that we feel like are going to be the top choices. We did one for ranking just to show you how those work. So a good example of that is you're considering several different options, several products or services, and you want to know how I prefer them in ranked order. Likert is good for your attitudes and your opinions on things. And then open-ended free text is really cool, but it does require some work to actually analyze that data. So anyway, you want to be concerned with the length, right? Less is going to be more in most cases, right? You want people to get through the survey without investing a lot of time. That's going to, it's going to be annoying after a certain point, right? So your tone, right? What kind of voice do you want to have in your survey? So this was one that, Greg turned me on to. Didn't have it on my list, but, he brings up a good point. It's like, how do you want to be perceived when you send out your survey, right? Do you want it to be fun? Do you want it to be sort of light in tone, or does it should be very business-like and have a lot of gravity to it? Of course, it depends on the subject matter to a degree, but you want that to be purposeful. Again, like however you do the survey, it should be with a particular voice or tone in mind. Okay, so there's some other things, which we're going to get into as we go down, which is, how do you, which questions should you include and why, and what should the formats of those things be? But from a high-level design perspective, these are some good points to consider. So in terms of brainstorming and refining, this is pretty small here, so you don't really need to read this, but the point is, and we're just looking at one example, is we started off with a lot of questions. We broke it down into categories, we refined those categories, and then ultimately we eliminated redundancies and sort of asked, like the 6 questions about a question that we talked about in the last webinar, to really refine that down and be purposeful about each question that was included. So this is a really high level look at process of brainstorming and refining. All right.
So next up, I want to talk about which questions to ask and how do we plan on asking those specific questions. So when we think about which questions we want to ask, we want to understand how we plan on using that answer and how we plan on collecting that data. So I'll give you some examples here. Do we plan on influencing something? And we can think about policy and influence. If we're going to lobby on the Hill for our members on their behalf, we probably want to ask a question that gives us the answer we want, right? Do you think that people should have fair housing? Of course we think that people should have fair housing. Well, 95% of our respondents said that people think they should have fair housing. That's why you should pass this bill, right? So we're sort of building the question with our answer in mind, and we're collecting results that help give us what we want. We also might want to ask another type of question, which is segmentation. Do you fall into bucket A and bucket B and bucket C? Which one of these is most relevant for you? And that's a fairly clear answer, but I'm also forcing my respondents into a box that I've pre-created for you. Now, as somebody pointed out in the chat, we might want to force people into a box because it's easier. When we look at the questions that didn't get answered in a minute, you'll see we didn't force you into a box, and you didn't answer that question. So we might want to consider as we're building those questions, but think about what outcome we have in mind with that question. What am I going to do with this answer? How am I going to apply this answer? Some of the questions we asked were for our slicer panel. Like, I want to know, of all the people who answered question number 7, what was their answer to question number 1? That was a very deliberate choice on our side because we were designing our filter panel. But other questions I ask in a very specific way because I wanted to make you think and I wanted to sort of force you to get deeper into the question. And did you or didn't you answer? It was pretty evident there. And then we might want to compare year over year. So if we're benchmarking our answers year over year, we want to be very consistent with our questions and our answers. I want to be able to measure what was everyone's answer last year, this year, and next year, and did we go up or down? So as we're designing our questions, again, think about what do we plan on doing with these answers? Am I trying to force a very specific point and I just want you to say what I'm looking for? Am I doing this to sort of put you in a box? And maybe I'm going to use that box later to market or segment or send a very targeted call to action to people who said A or B? Or am I looking to measure changes over time? I can think of some really good tools that do segmentation. If anybody out there is using Prop Fuel now, you're doing surveys for segmentation, right? Do you want to come to our physical event or a virtual event? That's going to lead to a next call to action that's going to have a direct outcome based on that. So as we're thinking about what we want to get out of it, we need to think about how we're asking that question and what we're putting into it. Now, let me give you some answers or some examples of questions you might want to ask. These are some real world things that I've been involved in the past. So if you ask your members, go survey them. Would you like an online community? The vast majority of the time, you will get the answer back, no, we do not want an online community. However, if we send a similar survey out to our members and we say something like, would you like to collaborate with other members in the community and connect with your peers in real time? They're going to say, yeah, of course we want that. So like how I ask this question is the similar answer, but asking the question in 2 different ways gets me to 2 very different answers. What's the real goal of my members? Do they really want that community or not? I need to figure out how to ask that question in the right way. You know, we struggle with this as well. If I asked every association out there, hey, it's important that your association has a robust data architecture and a multi-dimensional data lake with multiple streams flowing into it, they'd be like, I don't even know what you're talking about. However, if I said, hey, is it important for your staff to have access to consistent data? They're going to say, yeah, our light went off. They're going to say, yeah, of course I want access to consistent, trusted data. So it's all about how we phrase the question is going to change our answers. The same thing with answer types. Like, how would you rate your member service? Is it amazing, outstanding, or good? I'm really joysticking you into a box versus is it fair, poor, good? I'm giving you a more diverse set of answers that's probably going to give me a more reasonable answer to the question I had.
All right. Yeah. So how you ask it, I mean, all of these things are really about not asking leading questions, not biasing, their responses, right? So we didn't really talk about this, and you can read a lot about different types of bias. And we tried to sort of avoid all of these when we did this. So one is there's sampling bias, right? Which is you want to make sure that everybody in your audience has, more or less equal chance to or equal opportunity to fill out the survey. So mainly what you do is you try different channels, right? So if you have a survey that you want a cross section of age groups to take part in, then if you make it only online, right, that's going to exclude some of your older members, for example. That's a good example of a sampling bias. What about there's non-response bias, right? And so by that, and you probably had some experience with this, a lot of times the only people that respond to certain types of surveys are your highly engaged members. And so is that really a good cross section to ask questions, right? Because you're missing out on a lot of people that just didn't respond. And so non-response bias is something to be mindful of. Really, the only way to combat that is to really market, to make it easy for people to respond. And so that you're not just, if you make it difficult, only the diehards, right? The really engaged members are going to respond to that. And then the rest of them are types of response biases, which is, so you worked hard, you got a lot of people to respond, but you still want to make sure that you word the questions carefully, so you don't lead them, you don't order them in a way that's going to influence their later answers. Like, for example, if I ask you, a question about the economy, right? And then later on, and then right after that, I say, what do you think is the biggest problem that's, facing the state or the country or whatever? You're very likely to answer economy if that's one of the choices. So you may not intend to do that, but that's the way that you're influencing the responses. So that's something to be mindful of. And again, there's a lot of literature, a lot of things that you can read about that. Okay, so one more example of an incorrect way to ask a question, right? This is a question exactly from our survey, which is, what is your data wish list? And we thought this was a pretty good question, right? We talked about it. We decided this made the cut, when we brainstormed and we refined. And, this one was, almost every question was answered 100%. This one was skipped almost 20% of the time. And but why do you think that is, Greg? What did we do wrong here?
This is a really tough answer to give because I was excited about this question and I was really excited about understanding the answer. I think we asked too much of our audience. I think we asked them to really sit there and think for a few minutes and type out an answer and give us some deep thought, and they were clicking the buttons and checking the boxes and going through. Not that they weren't giving thought to their answers, but we've made them work too hard to get the insight we were looking for. And to be honest, I don't think people were willing to work that hard for the answer because they didn't think they were going to get a whole lot out of it. Somebody earlier said, like, why are we forcing people to give us these complex answers if we don't think we're going to use them in complex ways? I think this was an example. We made it too hard for our audience. We made the question too complex, and we made it too hard for them to answer it. And we made it really easy to skip it, so they did. Yeah, yes, that's a great point. So two things on this. One is it's probably not the right format. Like, we could have got the same result by asking a multiple choice question, which would have been a lot easier to answer. And so it's almost laziness in a way. Like, we could have thought of what the what the most popular answers were going to be and giving you that choice that you could select it. In this case, having you think of yourself really doesn't get the same bang for your buck, right? The same squeeze that you get out of a question like, hey, what can we do to improve, right? Because that's a very common free text question, and it's not one that you want to lead them, by providing specific answers to. Now, the other thing that you can do is when you select your survey tool, we purposely did not make any questions mandatory, right? Make them required, and we didn't use any skip logic or anything like that. So those are other ways that you can manipulate your survey, right? You can make certain questions required. You can skip, so that I don't necessarily have to do all the questions. I only do some based on how I answer certain questions. So anyway, that's a lesson learned, right? So we did test it. We tried our best to only provide the right questions in the right formats, but you test and learn with the survey as well as with the marketing. So, which is a great segue to the next part, which I wonder, Bill, if our testing was robust enough. Like, we tested this with our team, but the team who tested it were the people who knew what we were doing, and we talked about the questions and answers. I wonder if we needed to expand our testing outside of our core team and say, hey, you people are sample sizes. We need to test it on you. I bet they just skipped it. And I also want to call out what Ginny talked about in the comments here. She was one of our core team members helping us out with this. What a great answer about the pros and cons of odd numbers versus even numbers. I never would have thought about that when designing my survey or my Likert scale, but it turns out there's a difference between an even or an odd number of questions or a number of answers you can provide and how people segment themselves and pick. That's really exciting.
All right, cool. So we got a question before we move on to marketing. We got a question from Heather.
This is a killer question.
Yeah, so her association has a survey for all the events, 12 to 15 of them per year. Is there ever a reason to not survey attendees after an event, a webinar, a conference, or a meeting? So I'm gonna flip it on its head, Greg. You usually ask me the questions. Since I read it first, I'm gonna ask you.
All right, you beat me to it. Well, I need follow-up questions, so I'm gonna ask my 6 questions about the question. I want to know some things too, like what percent of people who attend these events actually fill out the survey? Do we constantly get good data and results back, or do we get 10% of respondents are answering our survey and the data is not very insightful? What are we doing with this? Are we actually leveraging the answers to our survey results in follow-up? Are we benchmarking the change over time? If I'm asking the same questions at every event, am I tracking changes over time and what those are going for? I'd say as long as we have good answers to those, survey away. Like, what a great point in time to ask people to take a survey. We ask you to take a survey after you finish every one of our webinars. We ask you questions during the webinar. But hopefully you understand we use those answers to generate more content, to change the way we present. We follow up with the people who said they hated it, and we beat them up in the alley behind the office so they don't come to our next webinar. And we get the happy people in the next one. But we're using those results on a regular basis. And I think as long as you have a commitment to leverage the answers to those questions and you're getting answers that are reasonable, keep doing it. I see there's some sort of like I've been over surveyed at some point. And I don't see that happening after a specific event. I expect you to use that feedback to make my next event better. I think you're good to go.
All right, cool. I'm going to add a couple things to that. I don't know the exact numbers, but there's definitely science behind this, that you get the best feedback like immediately, after your event, your webinar, or whatever. Even after just 24 hours, the quality of the data and the responses is going to be significantly less. So do it right away. And then the other thing I would say is you should not survey for any of those events where you either A, are not using the data, right? You're not doing anything with it, or B, if it's repetitive, like if any of those 12 or 15 events are duplicates of another. So unless there's a reason to believe that the seasonality or the venue or something that's different between them would make a difference, then I wouldn't survey, what could essentially be the same group, right?
What a good time to get your emotional reaction, by the way. If you survey me later about, hey, how did you think of our webinars all year long? I'm going to forget my emotional reaction to that webinar. If you survey me right after it happens, that emotional reaction is present in my mind, and I'm going to tell you what I think. That's probably a really good time to get that emotional answer.
All right, cool. Greg, so let's fly through and explain how we marketed this thing.
Yeah. So we marketed this many channels. We posted it in previous webinars. We had a QR code. We had a link. We segmented people down. We had multiple calls to action. We incentivized everybody to participate. We said, hey, if you participate in our survey, we'll show you back the results. We tried multiple channels. We set expectations. We set a time frame. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what you're going to do. And we tried our best to stick to that. We wanted to push this a little bit down the road so we had more time to collect it, but we were happy with it. What channels did we use? So we used email. We posted on Collaborate. We posted on Facebook groups. We went out to LinkedIn and did some social posting. We posted during the webinar. And which one by far blew everything out of the water was email. Good old email, never fails. We sent you emails. You said, yeah, I'll click on that. I'll answer your survey. And we segmented our emails. So we sent 2 separate emails to 2 types of audiences. Our first audience, I anticipate it's a lot of you today. We're the core audience, the people we see on a regular basis. And we said, hey, we need your help. You guys know who we are. We sent this out to 1,800 people, and we got a 25% open rate, a 2.9% click rate, 38 respondents there. But we did the same thing with a very large population as well. We broadened our list and we said, how can we wrap our hands around as many people as possible? I don't think we're going to get as much click through and conversions, but we're going to try. Similar open rate, but a very different click rate. So we were still getting people past the subject line, but because they didn't feel emotionally connected to our message, they didn't necessarily convert at the same rate. So what emails did we send? You've seen one of these 2 emails. You saw the one from Bill, your trusted friend. We think we might have been a little wordy with this email. We were a couple paragraphs in. Maybe we had your trust at this point, so we were really trying to tell you why we were doing all this. We gave you very specific call to action in the middle there. Bill's smiling face, click this email. Email number 2. Remember, this was the broader audience. We chose a different sender. So here we chose Mark as the sender, thinking he might have a little bit more name recognition. We talked a little bit more about who we are as a team to try and build some familiarity. We changed our call to action. It wasn't a nice, clean, formatted link. We literally put the link in there to see what differences that would make. We set expectations, shouldn't take longer than 5 minutes. We sent that email out. So let's go back to our results. How do these different things change? There he is. How do these different things change our conversions? So I think this is really interesting. We almost had the same number of people complete the survey from email 1 and 2, but our population was so much larger for email 2 than it was for email 1. Our open rate was so very similar, right? A quarter of people opened it, but that call to action just wasn't strong enough for email 2. That's why we had to increase our sample size. And then marketers love our conversion funnel. So 6,000 people got an email, 1,600 people opened the email. Look at how the numbers fall down. 116 people clicked it, 71 conversions, 1.2% of the people we called to action converted. So now we know, hey, if we want 100 results, how many emails do we have to send to get there?
All right. Okay, we've got another question. Do we have an opinion on survey incentives, right? So we talked about one thing I wanted to note when we looked back at the emails. One thing that I really like about this second email is the fact that the incentive is really prominent, right? So in exchange, here's what we're going to do, right? So it's very clear what you're going to get out of it. And so I actually think, the segmentation influenced it, the timing of the emails, of course, influenced it. So even though the results were actually better with email 1, I think there's a lot of reasons to like email 2 better. So if we had reversed these and maybe done email 2 first, I think our results might have been even better. So those are the kinds of things that you kind of put in your back pocket and you improve on, right, for next time. Okay,
let's get back to our question here from our anonymous attendee.
Okay. Yeah, so what do we like better, gift cards or donations to charity, right? I mean, I'll start it off, right, with the answer, which I don't usually like, but I think the answer really here is that it depends. You could try both, but I think that's going to vary a lot by the audience, right? Different memberships at different organizations might prefer them differently. I can tell you that we've tried both. In most cases, I think a charity donation is probably better if I had to pick one, but I definitely would say it depends, and I would be very curious about anyone else's experience or opinion on that. That's
I want to give you hidden option 3, which is a non-direct incentive. So here we're saying, I'm going to give you a gift card or I'm going to donate to charity. I think the third option is my personal favorite, is we're going to do better. Like, the reason I'm asking you these questions is so I can do better next time. You want a better experience, right? You want a better association, right? You want better events, don't you? The reason you're giving me the survey is selfishly so you can have a better experience next time. And I think that, in my opinion, is better than free lunch. There's a lot of ways to get free lunch, but there's not a whole lot of ways to get a better annual conference besides this survey.
Agreed. And I would also say that was another thing that we worked on with marketing for this particular survey, which is, we sort of threw the carrot out there, obviously, that if you respond, you provide us with some data, we're going to give you some best practices. We're going to basically do this webinar and talk about those kinds of things, but also the subject matter is helpful to the association community generally. So there's this sense that just by doing it, you're almost providing a service, right? And I think that's, again, on getting into the emotional side, I think people get invested in doing it. And if you can appeal to the members' sense of mission or to improving the industry as a whole, I think that'll go a long way towards getting responsive as well. So it doesn't have to be, when we say incentive, it's really just a motivation. It doesn't have to be an actual incentive, like something that has real tangible value. All right, cool. So that brings us to the last one where we're going to talk about today, and that's collect. And really, in terms of collect, there's a few things here, like the actual collection of the data. What tool do you use? We use SurveyMonkey, right? But there are lots of survey tools that you can use. How long do you keep the survey open for? In our case, it was 2 weeks. For something that's bigger and more involved, it might be 2 months, could be longer. But that's obviously something that you need to cover during your planning. So we've got a few minutes left here. I want to make sure that we show the answers, right? The feedback from the survey. What I've done, and I'll cover like how this was done and everything in the next one. But we got the data in SurveyMonkey. We exported that data, uploaded that to Power BI, where we're able to build some visualizations and do some analysis. So for today's purpose, I'm not going to do as much of the analysis piece, but I am going to talk through some of the results. Okay. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to make those in the chat. So first of all, on our demographics, we're mostly professional, right? So we have 63% professional, about 20% trades, and just under 10% are hybrids. About half are medium size, and in our case, medium meant 10 to 49 staff. Another 30% are 50 or more, so they're large, and the last 20 are the small guys, less than 10 staff. And we have a good mix of job functions, right? So executive and IT, surprisingly, were at the top at roughly, they're 25% each. Membership and marketing are next, 12 to 15% range. And the rest is we have a few events, operations, finances, and other. This one was surprising to me, primary role. So 75% of everyone that filled out the survey, and many of you on the call, are director level or higher, right? So we have a good cross-section of leaders on our call and responding to our surveys, which are great. So next are our multiple choice questions. We had 3 of those. And so what do we learn from these, right? So first one is about priority. So almost 90% view collection and analysis of data for decision-making as a priority. That's at least moderately high. So moderate, high, or very high. When it comes to data quality, over half rated it as moderate, so they're kind of just right in the middle. And 20%, rated it low or very low, right? So interestingly, no one rated their data quality very high. I mean, it's not surprising, but a little bit interesting, I guess. And then we looked at, other than your AMS, where's your most important data? So for most of us, it's in your events and your marketing system, and community and LMS are checking in there as well. So I don't think there's a big surprise there in terms of systems. Right. So the next question, we looked at ranking, or a ranked question, and this one was about the utilization or reliance on data in the organization. Now, I'm not going to slice and dice this in today's call, right? We have a filter pane over here, so we can do a lot of manipulation to this to look at different slices of this, but overall in the aggregate, membership was first, right? And so when I say first, right, these are the average scores, the average ranking, and the lower the rank, right, because one is the most reliant, so the lower the ranking, the higher the reliance on data. And so we had membership first, then followed closely by executives and marketing, which were almost the same. And then we had IT, and then we had research departments, which relied on data the least. That would be surprising to me if that were true, right? I mean, research departments are pretty famous, for their reliance on data. But nevertheless, these are the results that we got in this. So let's go to our Likert questions, right? So apologize, these are very small, but with Likert, it's pretty typical for each question to effectively get its own visualization. And if we look at one of these big, you can see on the legend, right, that our agree is the blue, our strongly agree is the pink, and then we have our neutral is the purple. And then, we don't have very many strongly disagree, but those are the light blue ones, right? And so if we think about that and we look at all of the questions together, we can see a couple of things kind of right off the bat, that in terms of strongly agree, we agree that we're using data to operate more efficiently, to ID our member needs, and to validate our assumptions, right? So if we just look at the pinks here, ones that have a little bit more pink, that's what I'm talking about here. If we think about places where we disagree, right? Disagree is the green. So where are the big greens here? Easily finding the data. So we can't find the data. We don't have KPIs, and we're not really using our data to target our content and our products and services, right? We have webinars on all those topics, by the way, which I'd encourage you to take a look at if you're in one of those camps there. And then in terms of strongly disagree or strongly disagree, data strategy, right? So if we take a look at this one in particular, right? So this is interesting, right? So this is kind of a double barrel in the sense, right? So because we say our association has a clear and documented data strategy, So you might be clear on your data strategy, but not have it documented, right? And you're like, well, I'm not really sure how to answer this question. So again, we double barreled this one on purpose because from our perspective, your data strategy does need to be both clear and documented. But I'm a little surprised at the numbers here, but for most of us, that are on the call and that responded, we are, strongly disagreeing or disagreeing over 50% of the time that we have a clear and documented data strategy. So I would say collectively, that's something that that we can work on. So then we had some free text questions, which were related to, first one was related to the biggest obstacle. We've used a word cloud here, which is really good way to get a high level understanding of what are the common responses, for free text. Now I will say that there are services that you can pay for. Power BI has a service, Amazon has a service. There are lots of them where you can essentially send them your data, your free text data. Or you can, algorithmically analyze your data and get, topic modeling and things like that. But word clouds are basically for free. What's really interesting is if I click on, sorry about that, I loaded this too long ago. But if I click on some of the actual responses, then I can basically sort my word cloud by just the words that are contained in that specific response. So give me a sec to find this again. Now, if I just click on one of these, then you'll see, kind of response by response, what are the main themes in that response. I think that's kind of interesting. And you can select multiple responses as well. So we did a word cloud for the biggest obstacles. You can see some of the things are integration, their time and resources. We know that's obviously a big one in many cases. On the second case, what's the primary way that we make decisions, right? So we have a board helps us make decisions. We have strategic planning. We use our experience, right? We evaluate the impact, right, of certain different outcomes, things like that. Not too surprising there. Now, here's an interesting one. How do you use data in your organization / goals? What does that even mean, right? Here's an example, right? We tested, we proofread. Here's an example of a case where we kind of let a typo slip through. There are people nevertheless answered it, which is good for you and them, for answering this question. The wording obviously is not ideal, but how do you use it, right? We use it for we use it for events, we use it for marketing and membership, really all of the different modules and business areas that are in a tool like Acumen, right? Because we're using it to make decisions, right? And again, if we just click on any of these, we can see examples of how this works, right, for individual responses, which I think is pretty cool. All right, last one.
But it also explains more about why Ginny tells me not to use tag clouds because they're hard to work with.
Yeah. And the last one is, what is your data wish list? Yeah, so this one, remember, this one got skipped, by lots of people, right? 20% of people just thought this was too difficult or too not clear enough, and they just didn't answer it. So we didn't get a lot of data that we might have otherwise had if we worded this question differently. But I love the fact that someone said everything, right? That's very simple, right? Everything was the answer. That's their data wish list. So I think that's a good place to stop, for today in terms of looking at our results. Next time, we're going to go into some analysis of these results. We'll look at a little bit more in depth on how we can slice and dice, how we can combine things a little bit differently, and also what action are we going to take right now that we have this data, and how you can apply that to the type of survey results that you have in your association.
Bill, this is cool. If I'm an attendee today, can I play with this? Can I get a copy of this and click around myself?
It's a good question, Greg. I think the answer to that is yes. So what we can do is, we can make this public. That's one of the That's one of the interesting things about, so I mentioned that we use SurveyMonkey, and this is Power BI. So some of you might be wondering, well, Bill, SurveyMonkey has some pretty good reports, and that's true. And we even looked at some of those, right? So we use SurveyMonkey, told us like which question got skipped the most often, which was cool. They told us how much time it took people to take the survey. But what's not as cool is when I want to share the results with Greg or with someone else, they have to have a login. So I have to have, credentials to do that. So it makes it less transparent to share it with other people in the organization. There's some limitations on how you can combine questions together and slice and dice things across questions. So lots of reasons that you want to use a tool like Power BI, but maybe the biggest one is, if I want to make this public, I can go ahead and and create these type of results and put them on a public site that's also interactive.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited
All right.
to play with this more, and for session number 2 here, where we analyze the data and start leveraging the insights from it. That's going to be the exciting part. I guess this was exciting too, but.
Yeah, so there's another question Heather's asking, is an annual member survey standard?
I have no idea. Is an annual member survey standard? There's a bunch of you on here, yes or no? Drop it in the chat. Is an annual survey standard? You do that sometimes?
Sometimes.
That's Bill's favorite answer. Depends.
I don't know, standard and sometimes can be used in the same. We don't. We have a lot of surveys throughout the year. Yes, we do. Jack thinks it should be. Yes, I don't. I mean, I guess it depends on how you define standard. I don't know how prevalent it is. I don't know if it's prevalent enough to call it standard, but it is common. And I really hedged my answers a lot more than I like today. Sorry about that.
I think an annual survey around the big conference is standard. Who attended? I think surveys when people interact with you at that time and at that point in time are very standard. And I certainly think that surveys are an easy go-to when we have questions we don't have answers to. But I would also say, being this is a survey session, we probably rely on surveys too much. We probably rely on the results of that annual survey over what the behavior and data is telling us. So as we talked about, you can influence people when you design the questions, and you can get them to answer one thing versus another. You can interpret the answers in different ways. So oftentimes I find people vote with their dollars and what they're actually doing with you versus what they say. An annual survey can be an important component of better understanding your data, but I wouldn't say it's the end all be all, and I wouldn't say it's the only thing I'm going to use while interpreting my data. I think it's a component of that. It might provide the flavor for you behind the answers.
For sure. So, yeah, I mean, again, I don't like to plug all of our old webinars, but there is a good one about that where we talk about different ways you can get at that information. Obviously you have to ask, and surveys are a good way to do that, but there are lots of other ways you can infer and discover and sort of predict, right? All that similar kinds of information. All right, cool. So let's wrap up with a few key takeaways. I want to recognize that every single person that was on this webinar at the beginning is still here, which is great. So thank you all for hanging in. We ran a little bit long, that. But it's key takeaways, right? Greg talked a lot about having goals, a goal or multiple goals, but they should be clear and be deliberate. Don't skimp on the planning, right? There's a lot of steps to that. So don't be in a hurry to push your survey out. Plan it out, be deliberate with the questions, the format, the order, right? All those kinds of things, so you can eliminate some of the biases. Generally speaking, less is more. We didn't talk about this, but you remember that a lot of times people are going to be taking these on mobile devices, right? So you just want something that's pretty simple, maybe one question per screen, and 21 questions is, I wouldn't say that's too many, but you just be mindful, right, of the amount of time and effort that it takes to do it. We talked about bias, test and learn in marketing. This is really important. So you spend a lot of effort to get other marketing messages out, right? You test those for membership, for your registrations, for renewals. Give the same sort of attention to how you market those surveys, because getting a high response rate not only gets you better data, but it goes a long way towards eliminating some of those biases that we talked about for non-response and response related biases. And the last thing is find tools. So we didn't talk a lot about this today. We'll get into Power BI and how useful it is for these sorts of things. And of course, tools like Acumen. And next time, find a good survey tool. They're, a lot of them are really good. They're inexpensive. But I do think it's important to not use that as a silo, to try to combine that with other data that you have as part of your overall picture of performance and things. So that's going to be really important as well. Last thing I will say before we go is, well, of course, we have the next webinar on the 17th at 3 p.m. But don't forget about decorating the wall. Greg's wall is totally blank, and we'd love to see some cool stuff up there for next time.
Whatever you want to send, as long as it's webinar work appropriate, it's going on the wall, and it'll be there in theory virtually forever. I also want to add a plug for the master of all here, Reggie Henry. I was looking at Collaborate, my digest this morning, and he roped me in with a heck of a question. What's the most important positive change you've seen in technology-wise over the last 18 months? And boy, did I want to answer that question. But then he tricked me, and I've got to download the mobile app and log in to take the survey. So help out ASAE and Reggie, download their mobile app, take the survey, participate with them as well. Master of all right there, tricking me into clicking the email and downloading the app. He knows how to do it. Thanks so much, everybody. I'll see you on the next one. If you get me that thing in the next week, I'll put it on the wall for next week. If not, drop it in the mail. Stop by and see us at ASAE Tech and hand it to us. And it's going on the wall. And I'm excited to see what kind of stuff we get.
All right. Thanks, everybody.